This is the Asia HR Forum 2023.
And we're going to start with the oldest generation. Some people call them the traditionals. I call them the matures. Some people call this the greatest generation. So this generation grew up through the Depression. World War II was a big impact in their lives. And they grew up learning about sacrifice and living through really difficult times. I like to share this story. This was during World War II. They had B-52 bombers. And at one point during the war, if you were one of these crews, for every 4 planes that left the airport, only 3 came back. If you can imagine that, you had a 1 in 4 chance of dying when you went on this mission. But this generation, they understood honor and sacrifice, and they showed up time and time again. If you sum up this generation, I love this quote from George Patton. He says, if you do your full duty, then the rest will take care of itself. So if you had to sum up these matures, this oldest generation, in one word, it would be this word of duty, right? Sacrifice and honor. Now the matures were followed by the baby boomers, right? And they came after World War II. Baby boomers are defined by their work. If you meet somebody who's a baby boomer, a lot of times they'll lead with what they do before they'll even mention like their family, right? They know it's a process when they get into work. They were all about kind of paying their dues and always learning and advancing. And they viewed the time when they were at work and with their leader, that was like a bonus. And if they showed up early and they were the last ones to leave, that was a badge of honor. So if you think about boomers, and if you've ever walked into a boomer's office, a lot of times you'll see their whole history on the wall. They've got their whole history on display. And if you had to define boomers in one word, it would be work. They're defined by the work that they do. Now, the boomers were followed by my generation, Generation X. Generation X was shaped by a few things. One, they were the first ones to come into the workplace and question authority. They had no problem challenging authority. They saw their parents who had been guaranteed lifetime employment, they saw that ending. And lastly, depending where you were in the world, the divorce rate for Gen X parents could be as high as 50%. This generation was dubbed the latchkey generation because many of these individuals would come home to a single-parent household after school and have to let themselves in to their home. They were also the first generation where it wasn't all just about work, but they also had this idea of work life and having a life outside of work. And so if you think about the Gen Xers and if you want to put them into one word, it simply would be this. It's this idea of balance, right? You have work and you have life, and it's this idea of keeping it in balance. Gen X followed by the millennials. Who's a millennial here? Got some millennials here? Okay. Millennials are a little bit different. And let me give you a few things of why they're different. The first thing is that their parents were way involved in their lives. Many times, if you're a millennial, your parents saved a lot less than previous generations. They spent a lot of that money on the family, things like vacations and second cars. And they were just involved in the lives of their children, even more so as a friend as opposed to being a parent. Millennials were also known as, have you heard this saying before? This idea of trophy kids? So this idea that if you're a millennial and you competed in something, who got the trophy? Everyone got a trophy, right? Everyone was a winner. And I love this. Some of the trophies are actually bigger than the kids themselves. And again, parents were super involved. The parents of millennials were often termed as like helicopter parents, right? Always being there, kind of hovering above their kids and telling their kids that they were special and that they could do whatever they put their minds to. And so based on that, when this generation went to work, their idea of paying their dues and future was extremely short term, right? They went into the workplace with these huge goals, and if it didn't happen straight away, they struggled and were disappointed. And if you sum up this generation in one word, just because of what their parents enabled them with, it's this idea of being special. Millennials were special. Now, here's the thing. Millennials brought a lot of great stuff into the workplace, right? They tend to be collaborative leaders. They work well in teams, right? Gen Xers like me like to work on our own and not be micromanaged. They brought a great dynamic. They were also the first generation to bring a sense of diversity. They brought this experience of engaging with others outside of their own ethnic group. So when they got to work, they were much comfortable being in a diverse environment. What about the most recent generation, Gen Z? So Gen Z is sometimes referred to as the I generation, as in the iPhone, right? They grew up with technology. They don't know a world without having access to 24/7 technology. But they also grew up in a very hard time. So their kind of growing up was influenced by the global financial crisis. Everyone remember that? 2009. Massive home foreclosures. They looked at an environment where companies were laying off employees, people were losing their homes. And so their sense of commitment to organizations was different than their previous generations. They didn't have that commitment to organizations. They're also much more entrepreneurial. This generation, for the first time, more of them would like to go actually start their own business than to go work for an organization. And similar to the here's another thing what's interesting. They also were the first generation to want to know the why behind what they did. So for 9 out of 10 Gen Zs, meaning was more important than things like money or even flexibility. And like the millennials, they brought a lot of good traits into the workplace. They're group-oriented, they're diverse, they're great at multitasking with their always being used to technology. But here's the thing. Gen Zs don't want managers, they want mentors to guide them along. They want fast answers, right? They've never lived in a world where they couldn't just simply take out their phone and ask Alexa and Siri what they needed to get. So don't think they're going to wait for you to give them answers. And because they don't see a difference between work and life, they're not 9 to 5 people. Right? They may have certain side gigs that they do, and it's a mix of going from work in life and work in life. So if you put this generation into one simple word, it's this idea of integration. Right? Now, I've given you an overview of each of the 5 generations. In the book, we looked at over 200 organizations of how they're doing things to cater and navigate across these 5 generations. And it turns out that there's 50 ways that you can do it that fall into these 8 categories. But what I want to do is give all of you today a tool that you can use that can help you navigate across the 5 generations. So I'm going to skip the Q&C just to get us a little back on time. But do me a favor, we're going to hand this out right now. We're going to be handing this out. This is called the generational leadership matrix. Okay, let me share with you how this works. The first thing that you're going to do is look across, everyone here is a leader. Look at which generation you fall into as a leader. That's the first step. So for example, if you were a boomer, you're going to go to that second column of being a boomer. And then the next simple step is that you're going to think about which employee are you leading, and you're going to go across the 5 different generations. So for example, this is the category under boomers for millennials. And this is going to give you advice on how to recruit, how to train, how to manage, and how to inspire across all 5 generations. So do me a favor, a handy tool, hang on to this. It'll be a reference point as you manage and lead across the 5 generations. Is that going to be helpful?
Sure.
Awesome. Cool tool. So my hope is I leave you that you're willing to kind of navigate the gray areas and lead your way across the 5 generations.